And there it is, a piece of history. The war is over in Afghanistan. For the first time in 20 years, there are no U.S. troops on the ground. Of course, we entered into war in Afghanistan to remove the Taliban from power after 9/11, to prevent Afghanistan from being a safe haven for terrorists. Now that country is being run by the Taliban, with ISIS-K, an offshoot of the ISIS group, also battling there and wanting to harm U.S. citizens. Another important note that while this military phase is over, according to the Pentagon, the diplomatic sequel continues, as there are hundreds of Americans still stranded there that want out. Let's bring in our senior White House and political correspondent, Ed O'Keefe. And Ed, this is quite a milestone for President Biden.
That's right. It is Tuesday now in Afghanistan, Nora, and it's been 7,268 days since U.S. forces entered there in response to 9/11. President Biden several times in recent months has said 4 U.S. presidents oversaw this war. He did not want to pass it on to a fifth. What was most interesting, I thought, there in listening to General McKenzie, is him describe what he called a pragmatic relationship of necessity with the Taliban. Didn't call it a partnership, didn't call him an ally, said it was a pragmatic relationship of necessity that existed over the last 2 weeks or so as this historic evacuation continued. And as you heard him say, some bad news in there. There are likely Americans and certainly plenty of eligible Afghans who didn't make it to the airport, couldn't even make it in the final hours because of the situation on the ground there. And there will continue to be a lot of questions from journalists, from friends and family of those people, from members of Congress about why they weren't able to get through and what will be done now in the coming days and weeks to get them out. We asked here at the White House today, what is the message to them? And the Biden administration makes clear that the commitment remains to get them out, but it's going to be quite difficult. One other note, while we will hear from the Pentagon, as we just did, while we'll hear a little later from the State Department, we will not, or we are not currently scheduled to hear from President Biden, although aides say he is likely to speak to this later in the week.
No doubt is the president achieving a long-term goal of his, which is to end the war in Afghanistan, fulfill a campaign promise that he made. And at the same time, the president, of course, monitoring the situation here in America with the deadly hurricane that is affecting many people in the Gulf Coast states. Let's bring in CBS's Christina Ruffini at the State Department. And Christina, as was mentioned, this was the largest airlift in American history, and yet hundreds of Americans left behind. What do we know about them?
Well, you heard General McKenzie be very frank about that. He said, we did not get everybody out that we wanted to get out. Look, some of the last 4 people out of that airport, the last 4 diplomats, included a consular officer. And that was so if someone got in the gate, if someone showed up at the last minute, they were ready to process those Americans and get them on the plane and safely evacuate them. But as the general said, in the last 4 hours, they just weren't able to make it to the airport. And that's something we've heard over and over and over again. Look, families CBS was talking to last night, Americans with blue passports just couldn't navigate the difficulties of Taliban checkpoints, gates that rotated close. And ever since there was the explosion around the gates on Thursday, it has been a really, really highly tense situation. It has been incredibly difficult, not just for Americans, but almost impossible for Afghans and Afghan allies, including those SIVs, those special immigrant visas, to get in the door. We asked earlier today a State Department official if they considered this evacuation a success. And while acknowledging the situation on the ground, that individual said it was a highly efficient and highly effective operation. But I'm sure it doesn't feel that way to the Americans and Afghans left behind.
Christina Ruffini at the State Department. Christina, thank you. And as was noted by the Pentagon, the last manned the last plane that left Afghanistan was at 3:29 Eastern Standard Time. On board was the chief diplomat, as well as the 82nd Airborne Division Commander, Major General Chris Donahue, were on that very last flight that took off. And as was confirmed by the Pentagon, there are no longer any U.S. service members on the ground in Afghanistan. So for more on that, let's bring in CBS's David Martin. And David, the question has been asked, of course, the Taliban then was in charge of the perimeter as this final C-17 was taking off. Yet, we learned, of course, there was overwhelming U.S. air power to protect that plane as well.
Well, the air power was there in case ISIS attempted another attack on the airport. The Taliban and the U.S. cooperated on this operation. There's no other way to put it. The Taliban wanted us out. We wanted to get out. So they worked together to make that happen. ISIS wanted to kill Americans, and they wanted to make the Taliban look bad. And they did that by launching attacks against the airport. One of them succeeded, a suicide bomber who killed 13 Americans. One of them, a vehicle bomb, was destroyed by an airstrike. And another 5 rockets fired at the airport did not do any damage, but they were considered a threat up to the very end of this operation. And now that the Taliban presumably has run of that airport, there is a lot of American military equipment there, which General McKenzie said had been, quote unquote, demilitarized, by which he meant destroyed so that they could never be used again. And it really is a fairly impressive list of equipment lost. 70 MRAPs, those are those large vehicles that were specifically built for the Afghan war to withstand these roadside bombs that were killing and maiming so many American troops. 27 Humvees, 73 aircraft. That's a lot of equipment to leave behind, and of course it helps explain why the U.S. military was able to get out so quickly. Remember, they put 5,000 troops in to help secure that airport. There were already 1,000 there, so in the past several days they have taken 6,000 out. But obviously they could not take all of the equipment that went with those 6,000 troops.
Billions of dollars of American military equipment, including those MRAPs that our soldiers needed so badly in the beginning and middle of this war to protect them from those roadside bombs, those all destroyed as America leaves the longest war in history. And on that note about history, David, I have to ask you, because you certainly covered the Pentagon for these 2 decades. I started covering the Pentagon after 9/11 and spent some time in Afghanistan. You were there many times. Reflect on this moment now, what it means to sort of hear that the war is over.
Well, you know, it's on us. And by us, I mean us, not the 800,000 who fought there. They did what they were told to. But we in this country made political choices that led to where we are today. And they may turn out in history to be the right political choices. They may turn out to be the wrong political choices. But you send an army to fight, but it's the country that goes to war. And at the end of the day, it was the country that got tired of this war, and that's why we had to leave.
Including presidents from both parties, from President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden. David, thank you, as always, for your incredible reporting and perspective. We should note that our coverage will continue on our 24-hour streaming service, CBSN. You can watch it at cbsnews.com or download our CBS News app on your cell phone or connected TV. There's going to be more in your local news, and we will have a lot more tonight here on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.